What's going on, my fellow makers? Matt from Keep Making. Today I'm going to show you how I made this myconid fungal unblighted dragon with a magnetic import for my leader. Let's get to it.
Shall we begin?
Right, so here's my dilemma. A couple months ago I made this Ilario proxy to play for Warhammer, but its base is much too big to play in Age of Fantasy or Age of Fantasy Skirmish especially. So what I did was I painted a whole new one that I could use as a Glade champion for Skirmish. But now that we've moved up to Age of Fantasy, the Ilarial's still too big and this one's too small. So need to do something different, so why not have a great excuse to paint a new mini? This is the Deepwood Dragon from Dragon Trapper's Lodge, part of the Mushroom Bayou release, I think. But yeah, check out Dragon's Trapper Lodge on my mini factory. So what I needed to do was find a base that was smaller than the Ilarial, but I also wanted the already painted model to be able to slot into this base because I didn't want to have to paint another version of that same model and have 3 different ones for 2 different game modes. So what I did was I imported a base that was 35 mil, the same as the base she already sits on. I scaled down this fungal dragon so that it was the size I wanted it to be. Then I just used a cylinder to cut a hole in its base. That way I can slot in her base. So once I had the scale down, I'm able to start printing this on my Elegoo Mars 1. The base itself is going to be printed on my FDM printer, the Ender 3, and then I'm going to print out some of these base pieces from Lost Kingdom Miniatures so that it matches the rest of my army. Once everything's printed out, I clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol and I begin taking the supports off in some hot water. So I start dry fitting the pieces just to make sure everything is in the right spot and it'll fit. Then I'm going to use some super glue to adhere a flat base onto the bottom side of this. That way when I slot the model in, she'll have something to stand on. The dragon itself needs to be cleaned up a bit because it has these pegs that are supposed to slot into the base it comes with, but since I won't be using that, I can clip these off. To make the base a little bit more interesting, I'm going to add some cork, just the same way I have on all of my other unblighted army, and put that onto the base itself. Then I can start assembling the model. Now that the model is all assembled, I'll need to find a way to get this magnet. So the best way to do that is to put a magnet on the magnet that's already on the bottom of this base, put some super glue on that, and just stamp it both into this place that I want it. That way when that glue dries, the magnet will always be in the correct spot. And from there I can keep adding to the base using those pieces from Lost Kingdom, and then I just add some cork anywhere that there's some overhang. Give the base that signature unblighted ground texture, I'm going to use this muddy ground from AK Interactive, and this is going all over the base. And the last step before I can prime this model is to fill any of the gaps between the glue joints, so I use some Vallejo plastic putty and a wet brush to make sure those are all filled. Here's how we're looking so far. Now we got to go hit this with some black matte primer. Once it's primed, I begin the undercoating process, so I'm putting some values onto the model before I add color. To do this, I'm using a light gull gray from Vallejo Model Air and giving it a zenithal highlight. That'll keep the black in the shadows, and the lighter areas that are exposed to the light will be lighter. Then adding upon that zenithal highlight, I'm going to go in with a pure white dry brush using a makeup brush so I can hit all the raised details and add a little bit more dimension. So the secret sauce here is speed paint medium and some flow aid. I add this to any colors I'm using, and that way all those undercoated values will stay. So I do the whole mushroom-esque part of this model and some buff from Vallejo. Once that base coat is done, I'm going to base coat all of the vines that hang off the model in this khaki from Vallejo. And then I can start the fun bit, which is getting a bunch of color on this model and painting all the mushrooms. Again, I'm using that speed paint medium and flow aid, and this will create a sort of speed paint effect that'll really bring out those values I've already put on the model. The wooden elements, or the head in this case, of the model is going to get a cork brown from Vallejo. So before I move on to some of the more vibrant colors, I'm actually going to hit this with a wash. So it's 2 parts green wash from Vallejo and 3 parts Agrax Earthshade, watered down a lot, and this is going to go on all of the elements I've painted already. This is the same treatment all of my Sylvaneth sort of fungal warband has gotten, and these will hit the rocks as well. Okay, now we can get funky. I'm using some pink speed paint on the back and some hard leather speed paint on the tail. The rest of the model is going to get variations of red, purple, and a little bit of blue. Now that I have the model base coated, I can start highlighting. So I'm going over all the vines again, this time in a brighter green, and that'll go all over the model. And for some of the mushrooms, they're going to get an edge, sort of edge highlight around the rims, and then some of the folds and sort of raised areas will also get a highlight. And once the highlights are done, I can start adding some funky details like the spots on the top of the mushrooms. And once the vines and the mushrooms have been highlighted, I'm going to come and do the base color, and that's going to get this bone white sort of highlight. Then I go in for a second round of highlights on the vines, just giving it some more dimension. So I added some neon green into my previous golden green mix, and that'll give us the final highlight for the vines. These purple mushrooms get a magenta sort of rim around them. The eyes will get a dot of pure white. Then I do a highlight of the head with a yellow ochre. Now to match the glowing magic effect I have on the rest of this army, I'm going to use this plasmatic bolt speed paint, and this is just going to be put onto the eye and pulled away from the center so that it has that sort of outward glowing effect. And I'll move on to the claws and the teeth. They both get the same ivory as the rocks on the base. And later on I'll come in with some wash just to tone them down a bit. So now that the dragon itself is finished, I can move on to painting the base. Real out of focus here, I'm going to use some pink speed paint on all the flowers and a green orc skin on all the grass sections. Then I'm going to mix this refractive green with that same flow aid and speed paint combination and do the top of this bonsai tree. Once all those smaller elements are painted, I'll paint the base as a whole, so I'm mixing some black with some flat brown to give us this dark earthy color, and then it's going to get dry brushed in that same khaki color I use on the base coat of the vines. And when the base is finished painting, then I can come in with some grass tufts and add some foliage. So I'm using these green ones from Shadow's Edge miniatures, and I'll come in with some Citadel ones, and those will be the arid tuft ones. Then I'll flock the rest of the base, but first I need to add some PVA glue. This is actually some fast drying wood glue that dries clear, so I just coat the whole base in this, and then I'll go over it with my flock mix that I've used for the rest of this army. What this is some Woodland Scenics green grass mixed in with some chopped up T-bits, as well as some chopped up reindeer moss. This gets applied all over the base, and then I'll need to seal it in with some isopropyl alcohol and some watered down Mod Podge. And before I'll call it done, I'm coming back in with some sepia wash. This is going to go on some of the mushrooms and all the underside of the mushrooms where all those ridges are, just to bring out some of that definition and give a little more dimension.
So now I have a fully painted forest dragon, fungal unblighted dragon, and a removable Glade champion, so I can use both of these individually if I want to have her mounted on the dragon. Simple as putting her there and she's not going anywhere. So if I want to play Warcry or Age of Fantasy Skirmish, I can use the Glade champion there, or have her mounted when I'm playing straight up Age of Fantasy. So perfect, we'll get into these money shots here. Remember to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel so you see my future builds, and there's no mistake, and the only way to get better is to keep making.
Shall we begin?